Muy buenas tardes, siendo las 15:59 horas, les saluda el profesor Cristian Cristóforo Scapini, coordinador del Departamento de Inglés del Instituto Superior de Lenguas en calidad de moderador. Se da inicio a la defensa virtual de Tesina con el título Elements of Control of a Totalitarian Communist Leader in the Novel Animal Farm Analyzed from the Historical Approach, a cargo de la autora Melissa Alejandra Spaini Ocampos, de la carrera de Lengua Inglesa del Instituto Superior de Lenguas. En calidad de presidente del Tribunal Examinador nos acompaña el profesor Ángel Aquino. Muy buenas tardes, profesor.
Hello, Christian. How are you doing? Buenas tardes, queridos profesores. Melissa, let me introduce you to the group here. We have Professor Rolón on your left, Professor Romina, Juana Bento right there. And you will have 30 minutes to defend your dissertation and 10 minutes to respond to each and every one of the questions we are going to ask you after your presentation is done. So you may start right this minute. Good luck, Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being here. I'm going to start sharing my visual aids. Okay, let me know when you can see it, please. Yes? Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here for my final dissertation. My dissertation defense is entitled Elements of Control of a Totalitarian Communist Leader in the Novel Animal Farm, written by George Orwell, and this is analyzed from the historical approach. I stand before you today to delve into the intriguing dynamics of power of a totalitarian regime and the elements of control exerted by a communist leader. I chose to analyze this story because of its timeless relevance, especially from historical approach, because there is a pattern that is repeated over and over again when as a totalitarian government is being established. We're also going to find historical parallelism between the events in the book and and real historical events. The statement of the problem. The statement of the problem is that we're going to analyze what were the elements of control that were used to establish a totalitarian regime. And we're going to see that also the intriguing power of dynamics that is established as the story progresses. My main objective is to analyze the elements of social control within a totalitarian regime employing the historical approach. My specific objectives are to identify the control mechanisms that were employed in this story. Additionally, examine the historical events or ideologies that influence the author choice and their portrayal in the novel. Explore the ways in which theme and power are depicted in the novel. And last, to explain the significance of symbolism to understand the roles of the character. My research questions. How do control mechanisms employed by the main characters reflect the strategies of social control within a totalitarian regime? What were the historical events or ideologies influenced by the author choice and other control mechanisms and their portrayal in this novel? How are the theme of power and corruption portrayed in Animal Farm and how they are depicted about the dynamics of power within a totalitarian regime? And last, to what extent does the use of symbolism in the story enhances our understanding of power dynamics? The significance of this story. Animal Farm primarily explores how power corrupts even the noblest intentions, and how some animals, a selected group of animals, become detached from the ideals and they become oppressors of the very principles they originally fought for, in this case, animalism. This analysis will describe how propaganda and other control mechanisms were used to manipulate and control the population. The historical approach. There are many approaches to analyze a certain story, but the historical approach is a very objective one, and it examines how the author's historical environment influenced and shaped his work. And it also seeks connections between societal context and themes, characters and plot, and it also provides deeper insights into the author's intentions. Before we get to the core of our analysis, let's briefly explore who's the mind behind Animal Farm. George Orwell. His real name was Eric Arthur Blair. And because of his life experiences, he had a deep understanding of political complexities. And we're going to see how his life experiences also shaped his political and ideological development. So his real name was Eric Arthur Blair, as I already mentioned. And he was born in Burma, now known as Myanmar, in 1903. At that time, Burma was under the control of British imperialism. And he was born into an aristocratic family without wealth, with no wealth whatsoever. They had the social status, but they didn't have the economical resources. And nevertheless, during his youth, he got scholarships and he could attend very exclusive and upper class boarding schools, like Eton. The last boarding school he attended was Eton. And because of his poverty, he was isolated from the rest of his classmates. And this helped him to understand class divisions and how society is heavily marked by it. Due to the lack of resources, he couldn't attend university. So in the 1920s, he goes back to Burma and work as a police officer. And working as a police officer meant that he had to take part in suppressing local uprisings, and he could witness firsthand the brutality of imperialism. It also affected his views towards imperialism. Um, During the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939, he volunteers to fight on the Republican side. And he could also witness this conflict expose him to the betrayals of revolutionary ideals. And this started to shape his political belief against authoritarianism and also deepen his commitment to democratic socialism. He was a vocal critic of Stalin, and he condemned all the atrocities that he committed during the Soviet regime. It also influenced his portrayal of totalitarianism in Animal Farm in 1984. By the time World War II came to scene, he had witnessed all these totalitarian and oppressive leaders around Europe, such as Stalin in Russia, Franco in Spain, Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, and so on. So in 1945, Animal Farm is published, and he wrote it as a political satire, which served as a criticism of the Russian Revolution, and he uses animals to represent historical features and historical events and people who took part in it. In order to understand Animal Farm, we need to take a look at the historical background. So, at the beginning of the 20th century, communism emerged as a powerful force, and it was influenced by the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Communism envisioned a society without social classes, collective ownership of resources, and equal sharing of labor. Those things will prevail in a communist government, in a communist society. So this ideology appealed to those who had to endure economic and social injustices. So the Russian Revolution in 1917 marked a turning point in Russian history because they just overthrown the last Russian Tsars, the last Russian Tsar, Nicholas II. And the Bolshevik Revolution aimed to bring radical social it aimed to bring radical and social and economical transformation to Soviet Russia. It also meant the rise of the Soviet Union under the leadership of Lenin and Joseph Stalin. However, after Lenin dies, Joseph Stalin rose to power, and he quickly deviated from those communist ideals that he stood for. So this transformation of the Russian society, they just got from an oppressive and despotic monarchy, and now they have just got into an oppressive communist government. Uh, I decided to include some of the main characters because I'll be mentioning them, and in order to understand who are we referring to, I included the main characters. All major represents Karl Marx, and he only appears in chapter one. Only chapter one. He symbolizes Karl Marx in the story. Napoleon is our main antagonist, and he represents Joseph Stalin. Mr. Jones is the cruel owner of manor farm who neglects the farm and the rest of the animals, and he represents Tsar Nicholas II. Squealer acts as Napoleon's manipulative propagandist. So these are our main characters. The plot summary, or it can be considered, or you may think that Animal Farm it's a short story or a story where animals are fighting, quarreling, and running around in a farm, but it goes a bit more deeper than that. So the story begins when the animals rebel against their human owner, Mr. Jones, and they're seeking for freedom and equality, and they overthrew Mr. Jones, so they decided to establish their own government, animal government, which is founded under the principle of animalism. And animalism was supposed to bring equality and social justice to the farm. But a small group of animals, Napoleon and the rest of the pigs, they take control. They start to take control, the size control of the entire farm, and those original ideals begin to erode. And the pigs start to gain privileges, while the working class, represented by the animals, they face hardships, while the pigs prosper. So the pigs' leadership mirrors human tyranny, which they originally were trying to get away from that. So the farm transformed into a totalitarian regime reflecting the rise of a corrupt government. Now we finally got to the elements, to the core of our analysis, which is elements of control in a communist totalitarian regime. And we're going to see that all these elements that I'll be mentioning are working together towards the same goal, which is total control. And the first one is centralization of power. This is the consolidation of authority and decision making in the hands of one single ruling party or one single leader. And during the Soviet regime, power was centralized by the Communist Party and Stalin himself. Same as the story, the only ones who are involved in decision making once the pigs have decided to do that, they are the only ones involved in decision making in the farm, while the rest of the animals are left out. The next one, language and propaganda. This is one of the main elements for a totalitarian regime because this is the use of language to manipulate information, shape public opinion, and control the narrative. And the Communist Party in the Soviet regime made extensive use of this to promote to promote communist ideology. And in the story, we can see that Squealer, one of the clever pigs, the most clever pig actually, he's the one who is in charge of giving these eloquent speeches to manipulate the beliefs and to maintain support towards Napoleon's leadership. Education and indoctrination. Critical thinking is not something that is welcome or appreciated in this kind of regime. So this is the systematic teaching systematic teaching of certain beliefs, thoughts to mold a kind of certain behavior. And this is done to mold obedient and loyal citizens. And during the Soviet regime, the Communist Party controlled what, everything that was taught at school, and they even promoted their ideology in there. And as I mentioned before, this was done to mold obedient and loyal citizens. In the story, the pigs are in control of teaching. They're the ones in charge of teaching animalism, which is often distorted to indoctrinate the rest of the animals in the farm. Violence and terror. No totalitarian regime has ever been successful without the use of fear, force, and intimidation to suppress any kind of dissent or opposition. During the Soviet regime, Stalin's reign of terror was one of the characteristics was mass executions, political repression, and they even targeted uh, loyal supporters of the Communist Party if they try to dissent um, with Stalin ruling. And there's a very specific example in the story, and it's when the hens refuse to give their eggs for sale, and so Napoleon decides to withhold their rations, and as a result, the hens died because of starvation and suffering. And all the animals are seeing this, and they are terrified to death. Personality cult. Every totalitarian leader in human history, they want to be loved and they want to be liked. They have a huge ego. So this is the creation of an exaggerated and glorified image built around a leader, and this is to foster loyalty and adoration from the population. Stalin was portrayed as this all almighty leader who freed them from the cruelty of the Tsarist monarchy. Same as the story, the animal's perception of Napoleon is of a heroic and infallible leader. So this is done to foster the loyalty and support to maintain their leadership in the farm. And every time Squealer, or the pig who was in charge of giving these eloquent speeches, he justifies Napoleon's actions by saying Napoleon is always right. So of course this is fostering loyalty towards Napoleon. The following is manipulation of history and memory. This is the reinterpretation of rewriting of certain historical events to manipulate the understanding of the past, and in order to fit a certain agenda. For example, the Communist Party, they regulated some history books, and they also reinterpreted some historical events to fit their own agenda and to make them look more heroic. And in the story, the pigs revisionist history, they rewrite the events that took place during the battle of the cowshed, and this is done to distort the animal's understanding of the past. And the last one, economic control and central planning. This is key for a communist regime because one of the pillars of communism is a collective ownership of resources. And so the government takes control of all the resources in the country, and this was aimed to be equally shared among all the citizens. And so the Communist Party also, and during the Soviet regime, they own major industries, and they even own what the farmer produce. And farmers who oppose or who refuse to give their products, they were sent to concentration camps in far Siberia, known as gulags. And in the story, we can see that in chapter 2, all the animals, once they have overthrown Mr. Jones, they agree that everything that was produced, it was to be supposed to be equally shared among all the animals. And just a few chapters away, the pigs have size control of the farm resources, such as the milk and apples, and this is for the pigs alone. So we can see the ideals of solidarity and equality has been distorted and corrupted. And you may think, how did they get to this? I mean, didn't they want at the beginning of the story to build an egalitarian society and to bring social justice and so on? And you can see that power and corruption are two elements which are often connected. When individuals or groups of people attain too much power, there is a potential, it's not always, but there is a potential for corruption to emerge. And there is an interesting phrase by Lord Acton that reads, power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The humans in the novel abuse their power by overworking and exhausting the animals. And in chapter 1, when Old Major gives this inspiring speech to encourage the animals to rebel against Mr. Jones, seeking for a more egalitarian society, man is portrayed as the only cause of suffering. And as the story progresses, we can see that the pigs who led the revolution also succumb to corruption. They have become detached from the ideals of solidarity and solidarity that they initially stood for and fought for at the beginning of the revolution. Being a satire means that overuse a lot of symbolism to represent important historical features. The farm, for example, represents the Russian society who sought for equality and social justice. Just when the Russian society got from the Tsarist monarchy, but now they have got into this communist and totalitarian regime. Animalism represents the revolutionary ideals of communism, but those ideas were also betrayed by the pigs. The windmill, the windmill represents um, in chapter 6 all the animals decide to build this windmill, and this represents the modernization and industrialization process that Stalin carried out in this during the Soviet regime at the expense of the suffering of millions of people. And Boxer, our hardworking horse, represents the working class who were often exploited and taken advantage by those in power. Finally, we got to our conclusion. The main theme of Animal Farm is the abuse of power and the dangers of unchecked power, especially if the masses remain dormant. The moral lesson is that vigilance and holding leaders accountable are essential for true progress. Citizens and masses need to keep a critical view of what their leaders are doing. They need to keep themselves alert. And the final stage of totalitarianism shows the total betrayal of those original ideals they stood for. And if you can see that image, it reads, all animals are equal. All animals are equal was the main principle of animalism to bring social justice and equality to the farm. But the pigs have changed it and distorted, and now at the end of chapter 13, the very end of the story, it reads, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And it shows that even the noblest intentions can be corrupted if individuals are not held accountable for their actions, and they have to keep themselves connected to those ideas of solidarity. And this shows the total betrayal of all those very principles they originally stood for. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Now we are going to proceed to ask you a couple of questions. I had in mind two questions, but you responded already one, but I'm going to ask you still two questions. Question number one has to do with this. What do you think George Orwell decided to write this political satire? And question number two, on a more practical note, how could you apply this in a public setting with 30 students having in mind 2 hours per week. So let me repeat the questions. Question number one,
Mm,
why do you think George Orwell wrote this political satire? What was his message? Because this is totally a political satire. And number two,
mhm.
how can you apply this into a public school, let's say, where you have 30 students? So take your time and just feel free to respond what you have in mind, please.
Okay. So the first question was, why did he decide to write a political satire? Um, because of his life experiences, he saw all the brutality of totalitarianism and the corrupt power of oppressive leaders. So he writes this satire as a criticism of the Russian Revolution. And as I said before, when he took part in the Spanish Civil War, he could also witness the betrayal of revolutionary ideas. So he did this to as a critique, as a criticism of revolutions and how power can corrupt even the noblest intentions. So this was done um, to encourage people to keep a critical
Michael,
view towards to those in power. And the second question was, how will I apply this in a public school with 30 students?
Moshe.
And I can't remember the rest of the question, Mr. Aquino. Would you be so kind to repeat it, please?
Of course. So I'm trying to put myself into your shoes, and you're about to teach 30 students. So this is a
Uh-huh.
piece of great literature. How are you going to teach using this piece of literature, using English, of course, to teach them English? Like, which strategy are you going to use?
Okay. Well, if I was in charge of giving that class, because I love this story, I have several books that I can use, and I will analyze this book chapter by chapter, analyzing vocabulary first, and what lessons can we learn, and how this, because this totalitarian government was not built in a day. It was step after step. So we have to notice what was the pattern what was that was being followed, and what did the animals what would they do differently, because they apparently all the animals and the masses remain dormant. That's why they were part of the establishment of this kind of government. So I will analyze it chapter by chapter, analyzing vocabulary, what questions, critical thinking can be taught with this literary work. And and that, Mr. Aquino, I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Professor Rolon, please, if you have any question to ask, do so.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Aquino. Melissa, I also have two questions. I would like to know if you could tell me what was the concept that Orwell introduced with the concept of animalism? That is my first question. And also, what was the key element or character that led that into
It's a hard word.
totalitarianism?
It's a difficult word
Yes,
to
I'm
pronounce.
sorry. So those are my two
Uh,
questions.
mhm. Okay. So the first question was, what animalism represented? That was your question, Mrs. Rolon.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Animalism stood for the basically represents communism. Communism was aimed to bring social justice to a society that had to endure many economic and social injustices. And they have all these principles that stood for solidarity, UNIF, community. So in the story, animalism represents communism, and how these revolutionary ideas, how the leaders quickly deviated from all this unity, solidarity, and equality. So that's what animalism represents in the story. And the second question was, what was the second question?
What was the key element or character that led that into a totalitarianism?
Our key character is Napoleon. Um, of course, he had the help of the other pigs as well, but he is the power hungry pig who notices that he can take advantage of this situation. And maybe he realized that these animals were not intellectual and they were not great thinkers as well. So they will agree to the establishment of this oppressive regime. I hope I have answered your question, Mrs. Rolón.
Thank you, Melissa.
Professor Bento, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Aquino. Hello, Meli. I have two
Hello, Mrs.
questions
Bento.
also. The first one has to do more with the methods per se. And it has to do with the fact that you chose the historical approach. It is my understanding that there are different approaches to analyzing a piece of literature. So why did you choose the historical approach? Did you explore any other approaches?
Yes, maybe criticism, but I was initially keen on historical approach. Uh, so we can establish the historical parallelism, and that there is a pattern that is being followed by all these oppressive leaders. If we take a look at Hitler in Nazi Germany, Gaddafi in Syria, Hussein, Stalin, even President Stroessner made use of these elements. So the historical approach is an objective one, and we can from my point of view, it appealed to me to analyze it from this approach because I could see all this historical parallelism. And as I said before, the pattern is being followed every time a totalitarian regime is being established, and how it seeks connections between the societal context, the themes, what represents what, who is who, and also the insights into the author's intentions and the work's significance.
Okay, so my second question has to do with Orwell and his background. And you said that he experienced a lot of inequality when he was young because he came from a poor family, and then somehow he was able to get to a higher level education and to an elite school, even as Eton is. And this is a satire about communism and how the good intentions are or can be twisted into something that it's not the philosophy of it. So what is the ending message, or what would be the final solution to how communism is corrupted by power, according to Orwell, in this piece of literature?
Okay, so Orwell message, and I think that it was his one of his main intentions when he wrote this piece of literature was that in the story we can see that all the animals and masses as well. There is a sorry, I just remember something. There is I have the book right here. I can remember her name. She went to concentration camps during Nazi Germany. She's a Jew writer, and in her book she says that uh, masses also participate. They have they also take part in the establishment of this kind of regime because they remain dormant. Same as Orwell, his overall message was that power can corrupt even the noblest intentions, and that we need to keep a critical, we need to to hold leaders in high standards if we want to see true progress. And we need to hold our leaders accountable, and especially we need to keep this critical perspective on what they are doing. And if they're not doing their job, if they're not serving the purpose for which they were chosen, they need to be removed. So in my opinion, that was Orwell's overall intention, that masses need to remain vigilant and alert towards what their leaders are doing.
Okay, thank you so much, Meli. Mr. Aquino?
Professor Fiorio, Melissa, thank you very much. Would you give us some minutes to discuss about all this? And I will ask you, Professor Fiorio, via chat to join in within maybe 5 minutes, okay?
Go ahead, Professor.
Melissa, it is my pleasure to let you know that you are the new bachelor. So I want to put my hands together for Melissa, please. Melissa, you
Thank
did
you.
an outstanding job. You have a passing grade for this presentation. So Melissa, congratulations.
Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you for your support and your feedback throughout the process of this of my thesis. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Esto ha sido entonces la defensa de tesis de la graduada Melissa Spaini.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gracias a todos.